Hey there, friends, and welcome back to my channel, Our Countryish Acre. My name is Rachel, and I'm a gardener that lives here in Western Pennsylvania. For reference, we are growing zone 6A. Now, today I thought I would tackle arguably one of the most overwhelming aspects of seed starting, which is when do you actually start those seeds? Getting the timing right is key to this. You don't want to start your seeds too late because then you risk not getting a harvest off them or not being able to cut the flowers. But if you start too early, then your seed starting shelves just turn into a jungle of a mess. It gets very overwhelming, and you likely will throw in the towel before the garden season has really even started. So, how do you know when to start those seeds? Well, it all comes down to your last frost date. Your last frost date is the day in which your area will probably no longer see any more hard frosts for the springtime, and it's safe to transplant out your seedlings. Now, it's important to note that your last frost date is not a guarantee because it's usually calculated as an average of when your area has had their last frost for the past, 20 or 30 years. There have been years here that our last frost has happened maybe a week and a half, 2 weeks before our last frost date. And we've also had years that we've gotten a late frost that was after that last frost date. So you really want to use it as a guideline and kind of do plus or minus a week. You don't have to go back and look at weather records for the last 20, 30 years to figure out when those frosts were and figure out that date yourself. There are websites that are made to do this. One that I really like using is the Old Farmer's Almanac. I'll put the link to their website in the description, but you'll just go to their website, put in your zip code, and then it will generate your last frost date for you to use. It's really that simple. Now, once you have your last frost date, there's really two ways to go about figuring when to start your seeds. The first and probably most straightforward is to just pick up your seed packet and read the back of it. So I have some phlox here, and under the sowing instructions, it says sow indoors 6 to 8 weeks before the last frost. So I would just keep a list of phlox 6 to 8 weeks. And then I would go to my calendar and count back from my last frost date 6 to 8 weeks, and then I could write phlox on my calendar. Another option that you have that doesn't involve, reading all of your seed packets and coming up with your own list is to use a seed starting calculator. So Johnny's Seeds has a really great seed calculator where you can plug in your last frost date. It will not only tell you how many weeks you could start that ahead of time, but then it also gives you those dates so you don't even have to calculate it out on the calendar yourself. So that could be really handy if you have a lot of seeds and don't want to read through all of the packets. Now, like with your last frost date, some of these seed starting dates are a little bit of a guide. So as you get more growing seasons under your belt, you'll probably learn where you can push the boundaries a little bit. For instance, peppers are usually recommended to start at about 8 weeks before your last frost. I have found that hot peppers in particular, for me, germinate really slowly and they take a long time to put on growth. So I tend to start these closer to 10 weeks before my last frost. Now, I wouldn't recommend deviating from the recommendations if you're new, but if you've had a couple years under your belt and have taken really good notes and can reference them, then you can kind of use those as more of a guide. Sometimes I've also started some flower seeds a little bit ahead of when is usually recommended because I want to end up with a really beefy seedling before I go to transplant it out in the garden in May instead of kind of a smaller one. I want that instant gratification when I plant them out. And I do have the space on my seed starting shelves, which is why I do that. But that's pretty much it, the basics of figuring out when to start your seeds. Like I said, it's not very complicated once you know your last frost date. It's really just counting back weeks and figuring out dates and looking at what the suppliers recommend. Now, before I go, I did want to give you one last piece of advice, and that is to get a journal to keep notes while you're seed starting. I always write down the date and then what seeds I started on that day. I try to put the supplier just so I can look back at germination rates and that sort of thing. But that's, just something extra that I do that you wouldn't have to do. But try to keep good notes. So that way, when you're seed starting, next year, you can reference it and say, like, I really should have started those a little bit earlier, or those got way too big, way too fast. Next year, I'm going to kind of hold off on starting those. So I find myself looking back at my past journals to kind of inform what I want to do this year. So there you have it. I hope that this video takes away some of the question marks around when to start your seeds, and I hope that it is encouraging to you and that you do want to give seed starting a try this year. As always, if you have questions, please feel free to put them in the comments below. In the next coming months, I am planning on doing several grow along type videos, so if that's something you're interested in seeing, please make sure to subscribe. Until next time, friends.